All right, everyone. Hi. Thank you for joining. So awesome that you are here. Yeah, very happy to see everyone. I'm just admitting more people. Can you guys see my screen? Can you just give me like a little hands up if you can see my screen? Yep, awesome. Thank you. All right. Okay, y'all, let's get going. As you know, this is a three-part series. Today, is the free one as well as the recording is going to be free. And then the other ones, if this resonates with you and you want to learn more about what I have to talk about with water, if that's something that calls you, just go to my website and you can purchase access to the rest of the sessions. So just a little housekeeping to begin with. I'm meeting more folks. Okay. So I want to talk about water and conscious spaces. Today, the first thing that we're going to talk about is how civilizations and water interact. How do you form civilization uh, in terms with water? So this is a very personal journey that I'm going to share something that I shared outside of just my wife, but now it's time to begin to share it. I had a very deep vision in the hypnagogic state, like right before you're going to go to sleep, right in that state, about a civilization that had water portals at the center of civilization. And people used the water portals to both communicate and to move across locations in the civilization. Being that it was such a deep encounter and such a deep vision, uh, it took me a while to come out of it. And as soon as I finished, I went to take a shower. Okay. So we're going to start with some heavy stuff, right? This is why we're all here. We want to hear some new stuff. Okay. So I went and took a shower and I began to see water writing on the walls. Okay. So this is a method called dripping that I will talk about more in future sessions. But as you can see, as the water dripped on the wall, it was starting to make Hebrew words. So I started seeing, hey, which one's this one? Which one's this one? Which one's this one? Right? And I put it all together. And lo and behold, when you put it all together and you take it to translation, it says, we will tell you. So at that moment, I decided that I was going to listen to what Water was saying and what she wanted to tell me about those civilizations and just water in general. Okay, so my next question was, if that's where civilizations are going, how come civilizations look like this? How come like this is the way it looks right now in current society? How come in parts of the world it looks like this? Right? Why did our civilization take this route as opposed to say something like that or something even higher like this? Well, in order to start understanding this process, we're going to talk about water as actual governance. Okay. So, what I'm going to share next is just a framework, you guys. It's not like, oh, this is exactly the way it is. By no means. This is just a framework on how to think how water sets the tone of civilizations. Okay. So let's start with Eden. In Eden, we know that by definition, Eden was a trans-dimensional environment. What do I mean by that? Well, we had Adam and Eve, man, and God, right? That were together in the garden. So beings of multiple dimensions in one same environment, right? So it was a trans-dimensional environment that was fed by rivers, the four rivers, mist and dew. We're going to talk more about the mist later, but the idea here is that, hey, listen, the garden got watered by four rivers, yet it was a trans-dimensional environment. So for those four rivers, they have both a transdimensional higher plane existence as well as a 3D existence. So in the garden itself, there was water that flowed in the higher state, the transdimensional state, as well as water that flowed in the physical 3D state. As evidenced by when Adam and Eve get kicked out of Eden, while there's still present physical rivers there, but obviously the transdimensional state where they could walk with God, then that ceased to be. Okay, so let's explore the water governance of Eden. Heavenly rivers, earthly rivers, and mist. That's how they were using the water, right? Creating all water and all weather cycles. When God tells Adam to create the visible world, right, it includes creating all of the weather and all of the ways that water would then flow throughout Earth. And they are designing Earth to coexist transdimensionally. That's the whole point. The area of governance, well, it started regionally, right, just wherever Eden was, but the goal was for it to be a planetary level environment that could host multiple dimensions through water. It was of very high consciousness, right? And both the male and the female were present. Okay, so the governance model of Eden was transdimensional coherence between heavenly rivers and earthly rivers to water the garden and earth, walk with God, and design reality by choice. Adam and Eve could choose to stay there or not. All right, let's keep going and explore another civilization and how they governed through water. Well, the Watchers, right? That whole Enochian part of the Bible that, excuse me, in Genesis, where it says that the Watchers came down and started intermingling with the daughters of men, and the giants started to control all of the earth after the fall, right? What they started doing was they started using man to dig channels and to dig rivers. So what's going on there, right? They were terraforming the planet by river making and channel digging. They attempted to govern completely planetarily, but it was of a very low consciousness because they were eating people and raping the women. And the governance model was to reroute abundance and consciousness, because they got to reroute the rivers, into a system of fear and control. So everyone was entrained into their society by force. Obviously, we know that that doesn't last long because then the flood comes, right? Okay. The apocryphal story of Atlantis, just as an example, how did this society use water supposedly to create? Well, they were a maritime society that was completely planetary across the whole world. And they attempted to form weather patterns by the resonance between crystals and water. They used water, right, to design Earth and coexist symbiotically across all Earth. And again, you can see the level of, hey, we can maybe make weather and control the weather patterns and therefore have a society that controls weather patterns. They also used a lot of water temples for ritual. They built infrastructures by which, if you go to the temples, you reach higher states of consciousness. And all of these were water temples. It started regional, and its heyday ended up being planetary level society, supposedly. And the consciousness was high because it was male and female, and it wasn't too militaristic. So the governance model was to attempt a symbiosis of all earth and weather. And what that yielded was commerce and politics, the commerce and politics of that particular age. And if you were of that culture, then you got entrained into that level of consciousness, right? Entrainment is when where all of your internal rhythms and your self-awareness gets entrained into a larger thought, into a larger whole. So if you were of this civilization, these were your values. It was an attempt at real order. All right, let's keep rolling with this. Another example. What about the ancient Egyptians? How did they use water to form a whole civilization? Now we're getting into the ones that we're a little more familiar with. Well, they obviously had the Nile, right? The Nile River. The pharaoh supposedly had the capabilities to flood the Nile by understanding weather and making it rain. This is where we get the word rain, R-E-I-N-G, right? The reign of the pharaoh is because he actually made it rain in water to then flood the Nile. And across the Nile, having governance over the Nile and knowing when to flood it, that created rhythms, that created weather rhythms, that then created commerce and then created politics and then created the patterns of agriculture. So if I control the river, I know when there's going to be harvest season and when there's not going to be a harvest season. Therefore, I control the value and the abundance and the rhythms of abundance by having the ability to control the rain. And therefore, by terraforming a huge swath of land. What is very interesting about the Egyptians is that they also had a ritualistic usage of water. Across the Nile, there were tons of different temples. And all of these temples, the goal of the temples was to create spaces of higher consciousness that when the human or the leader of the society would go through the temple, they would be initiated and increase in consciousness, and I'll go through some examples, in a way that they would become the equivalent of being enlightened in their age, the equivalent of what they would say transfigured in their age. Therefore, creating an example to follow for everyone else. Hey, if you give yourself ritualistically to the improvement of your being and the enlightenment on your being, that those people became the leaders that then show the way. That's the ability they had to create an infrastructure that gets you to a higher state of consciousness. But the consequence of that is that it created a political system where only the ones that could access the temples had the ability to become of higher order. Nevertheless, based on the archaeological record, many of them worked. One of my favorite ones is Abydos, this one over here. This is called the Osirion. Somehow they had the ability to call the waters of the deep from deep springs under the earth, to call them up. And they had this temple built underground, made out of quartz, that was able to then, with the quartz, it was able to then resonate with the mineral compositions of the waters from the deep and the pressure of all of the land and the sand and the soil on top of it, that it created a rejuvenation chamber for those who went through it, right? So you start going through this tunnel, you go underneath, then the waters ritualistically would come up, and as you walk as the waters rise, you go from one end to the other. And purportedly, when you end and when you finish this initiation process, right, the water inside of you has been cohered and your body has been rejuvenated, and therefore endowing the human with higher dimensional capacities by uh, 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 the ritualistic usage of water. Okay, that's a lot. So they used, just to recap with the Egyptians, they used the Nile River and the underground springs and temples for both commerce and ritual. They designed the water cycles by controlling the flooding of the Nile. They attempted weather control by creating rain. The area of governance was regional, but could be planetary as that society continued to expand itself across the Delta and into the Mediterranean. And it was of high consciousness because there was a combination of male and female, and their goal wasn't necessarily to control, right? Rather, an attempt at divine order by water. The attempt was for spiritual growth for everyone that went through the temple system. Nevertheless, it had the consequence of the symbiosis, the attempted symbiosis with the river had the consequence of creating rhythms, and that created the commerce and the politics of its age. So if you were of that era, you got culturally entrained into this governance system, and there was, of course, a modicum of military coercion, right? Because kingdoms still fought wars. Okay, what about the Greeks? And as we go through this, hopefully you're beginning to see common denominators across all of these governance models. Well, the Greeks used coastal military power to conquer. So right out of the bat, lower consciousness, because they were a conquering kingdom, a conquering empire. Nevertheless, they also still had some semblance of temple grids. This is the Oracle of Delphi or Delphi. Supposedly, the oracle could sit right under a spring and mineral vapors come out of the spring, and the oracle seeped in that mist would then be able to answer all questions. The oracle, they were called the Pythia, and from the Pythia, we still to this day have pithy sayings. So the Pythia, all of the high-ranking officials of the army or of politics or of government would come to the oracle to ask the highest level wisdom questions, and many things that to this day we attribute to the Greeks. For example, the political system, the entry-level political system of democracy, the entry-level system of rights, human rights, and governmental services for the poor are suggestions and sayings from the oracle at Delphi to Solon. So the wisdom imbued in the water through the temple structure created the governance of a whole empire. Continue militaristic approaches throughout the coast, create the first attempts at human rights, create the first attempts at democracy, all as a consequence of what the oracle said. Much later, now in modernity, they in fact proved that the oracle was right under a spring. Okay. Water usage, coastal commerce, naval dominance, springs and wells for an oracular system of politics. Their area of governance, regional and almost planetary, and had the ability to be transdimensional because, like, wait, where is all this wisdom coming from or all this knowledge coming from? It was of a mid-consciousness because it was used to conquer. Yeah, and the governance model was oracular water wisdom that created high politics and high military power. And the individuals got entrained into this governance through culture and through military. All right, what about the Roman Empire? We just got a couple left, y'all. What about the Roman Empire? Another society that was coastal and military, but they actually had governance through the usage of water through the creation of the aqueducts. This was a empire-wide engineering feat that transported water from high reservoirs throughout the whole empire, using systems that frankly we still use today, right? So the water at the source, whether it's rivers or springs, then the way that they chose to do water governance was by actually doing an infrastructure layer that transports the water, but just as transports, you could turn it on and off. So therefore, the water governance was an infrastructure engineering feat, an infrastructure layer that turned on and off abundance. This is Agrippa. He is the one that was in charge for all of the water in Rome and the cleanliness of the cities and all of the fountains and all of the aqueducts. Right? Just like the pharaoh, there's still just like the oracle, right? Now we have the architect, a leader that determines the water infrastructure. All right. So the Romans, coastal commerce and naval dominance, right? Using topology for hydraulic systems that were empire-wide. The aqueducts control the flow of abundance and of consciousness. If you don't do what I say, no water for you. Their area of governance was regional, but almost planetary, right? Like they almost conquered the known world. The consciousness was low and mostly male. Why low? Because they actually had no ritualistic layer for the sake of spiritual growth, like many of the other ones that we just talked about. engineering control of water, abundance, and consciousness. An attempt at total control. All right. Hopefully you're seeing all of the common denominators because it's all going to make sense. It's all coming to a point. So what about cathedrals? We've all seen a semblance of this image on the internet, right? That when you vibrate water in a plate at certain frequency, it makes these cymatic fractal patterns. Yet these cymatic fractal patterns are eerily similar to the stained glass window designs of the cathedrals across the medieval age before and even into the Renaissance. So what are these folks doing? But it wasn't only just cathedrals. Aztecs, Egyptians, Hindus. There's a similarity of design between water vibrating at a certain frequency and the designs of the cathedrals. But what no one tells you is that under most of these cathedrals, they were wells and springs. All of the cathedrals were built on top of the springs. So what they're doing is that they're resonating the water at a particular frequency as light and mist comes into the pattern of the stained glass window, and that's what they're programming the water with, because it's all about water governance. After that, they would grab that energy and vibrate it across a geographical region by the tolling of the bell. So that's why the churches were in the center of the town. They were setting the consciousness of the whole area by proximity, to the degree of how far the water would reach and how far the sound of the bell would reach. Water governance by proximity. But it wasn't just Christians. The mosques use the same water governance method. Particular frequencies into the wells, and in the mosques, you can't really go and see the wells. Same system. Then the spires and the call to prayers send out the energy or the state of consciousness by proximity. And that's why the mosque is at the center of the town. And obviously, many other cultures used this same water governance method. So, water usage, harmonizing the springs and frequencies, and then propagating it by sound. The area of governance was regional, right? To the degree that how far that spring went and how far the sound could emanate. The consciousness, this is mid because you don't have a choice. If you see on the other ones that are higher, it's still by choice. This one is cultural entrainment, entrainment by proximity. The attempt of this governance model was to harmonize the springs and the frequencies propagated by sound to create homogeneous spiritual political areas. Hey, if we use this water governance model, everyone's going to think the same that uses this model. Okay. What about now? We can't even see the water. Right now, the water's underneath in pipes. Treated chemically in huge plants. And our cities don't interact for the most part with the water because it's all underground. And the design of our cities is dense and square. This image of any random Western city is eerily familiar with the design of a microchip, because the consciousness is not to be propagated rather than extracted. The chip's computational power, what it does is that it grabs all of the energy to compute a specific outcome. The water governance of our current cities do the same thing. Trap the consciousness below and siphon off energy and siphon off consciousness from the people. Distribution via underground pipe network and water treatment facilities. This governance model is regional, but it's also planetary. Many cities have it. Obviously, very low consciousness, because the governance model is the centralization of water resources and consciousness. Conquest via convenience and apathy. People are entrained into a low consciousness by cultural and financial entrainment. Okay. So what happens if we grab all of these different water governance models that we just spoke of and we put them in a little matrix? Okay. High consciousness, freedom, right? Low consciousness, control. We have regional, we have planetary, and we have transdimensional. So I'm just placing them the way that we talked about, right? Eden was transdimensional because it was a place for God and man. High consciousness, you could choose to be there. And we can see how Atlantis or ancient Egypt was planetary and of high consciousness. You could make an argument that the Greeks were both low consciousness and high consciousness, because to this day we still use a lot of the things that the political artifacts that they invented, but they were conquering civilizations. I didn't talk about the Druidic water governance, but I will talk about it in other sessions. Then the cathedrals and the mosques, right? You might be propagating a state of being or a set of conscious understanding, but you don't do it by choice. So that's why it can be high or low, right? And I have current cities down here. All right, so let's start dividing this across time. These were the antediluvian water governance models. And this is Jesus, when Jesus comes, when he incarnates. All right, what's next then? It is what I'm calling the Aquarian opportunity. Why Aquarian? According to the Mazzaroth, according to the Zodiac, we're moving into the age of Aquarius that is characterized by the expansion of consciousness. It's symbolized by the pictures of water flowing across man. So, just gotta move this for a second. What do we do with this Aquarian opportunity? We can either continue the momentum of the current cities and create a dystopia, and all of the water continues to be underground and centralized. Or we can begin to create a naturalistic water governance model, a symbiotic water governance model that's of high consciousness. or we can even start interacting with the heavenly bodies of water. Just like back in these times, the Edenic times. So what do I mean by the heavenly bodies of water? Creation happened when wisdom herself separated the waters from above from the waters from below. And as the waters from above and the waters from below got separated, that's how the visible creation came into being. But what does this mean? The waters from above is the allness of God. And the waters of below is a subset of that allness that then takes form and dimensionality, and therefore inhabitable by the individual. So the waters from above, all of the God consciousness, everything that God is, wisdom took a subset, and that subset of allness into somethingness takes form and dimensionality. This nested logic of a total and a subset is still hinted at within the Hebrew language. The Shamayim is the heavens and the Mayim is the waters. A subset. The waters from above giving shape to the waters from below. And by the way, there is countless indigenous societies that also have their founding myths from waters in the sky. So here we go. Water is a transdimensional carrier of consciousness that is H2O in certain dimensions only, but it's always consciousness. This is one of the main takeaways that I want you guys to internalize. Water is a transdimensional carrier of consciousness, but it only happens to be H2O only in certain lower dimensions. Because it's a subset of the allness, and only the subset takes form and dimensionality. Okay. So if water is transdimensional and water is consciousness, that only sometimes is H2O, let's explore that transdimensionality. Let's explore that consciousness, not through history that we just talked about, but rather actual interactions with it now. So hopefully everyone here knows about Masaru Emoto and his experiments and photographies of crystal. What he would do is that he would take some water and then transmit intention or emotion to the water. And depending upon the quality of the intention or emotion that people would transmit to water, it would then organize itself in patterns, in crystal patterns, according to the emotion. If you tell the water, hey, you fool, it's disordered and ugly. And if you say thank you, it's coherent and fractal. Thus quantifying emotion, thus hinting at its consciousness beyond a particular language, because it will work in any language. And we begin to establish its actual consciousness. Okay, what else? All right. water reflects, it draws, it synthesizes, and it converses. There is a new water researcher called Veda Austin that I really, really encourage you to go look at her stuff. In essence, what she does is that she puts water on a little Petri dish and then either talks to the water, gives the water an image, gives the water a sentence, and then she goes and freezes the water. And afterwards, when you see at the ice freezes in all of these particular shapes that correspond to the image or the intention or the conversation that you had with water. In this case, you can just see how they put the pyramid here. Then she went and froze the water, and this is how the ice looked like. In this one, the water had the hand of the baby, and then the ice actually drew the hand. She showed a picture of the vineyards, and then the ice created the picture of the vineyards. And the same thing with a little placemat. So further relationship with the water showing its actual consciousness. It reflects you, it synthesizes what you're saying, and it converses with you. There's this almost at this point, almost like a meme that says that water holds memory. Yes, of course it does. But it is so much more than just memory. It shows the present. It shows you potential. Water shows the future. And water seeks relationship. In this case, we're going to show potential. And by the way, anyone can learn this method, right? Just look her up and you'll easily learn it. In this couple of she calls it crystallography. In this couple of instances, she put a seed into the water, a grain into the water, a seed. But then the water showed the full flower of the seed. Potential, not just quote unquote memory, but potential. Now the water also does future. This is something that my wife and I did a couple of months ago. I grabbed this little Post-it and I asked the water for her to tell me whatever she wanted. Then I put the water on my little Petri dish and I put the dish on top of my Post-it note. Okay. Then the water hears what I'm asking her. I went and grabbed my little dish, went to the freezer, froze it. For me, it takes like 10 to 12 minutes. And while it was freezing in the freezer, my wife played this meditation for us about the feather, right? In that meditation, I had a very deep encounter that I'll share in another time where someone gives me a feather. After the meditation finishes, I go to the freezer to grab the water, and there was an image of a feather. There's the image of a feather right here. That's what it froze. It knew the future. This is another example that Veda talks about a lot about the future. She had a friend put her thumb in, then when the shape of the ice showed the thumb, but a little hole here, and then her friend in real life chipped her nail later. So it's understanding the future as well. See that transdimensionality that I'm telling you, that water is in itself consciousness. Okay, so then what about relationship? So on this day, I wrote this down to the water, asking her if I'm ready to ask questions. And yeah, that's the way I write. It's pretty ugly, but I asked her if I may, if I'm ready, can I ask her questions to learn from her while honoring and loving her, showing humility, order, and confidence. And I used spring water from Lakeway, Texas. I live in Austin and Lakeway is right next door. And then I put this little piece of paper under my petri dish and then I went and froze it. Y'all, this is what came back. So I see a being. This is the face. This is the halo, taking its mask off, revealing herself. I see a book, knowledge. I see a key. And then I see a hand, see like the fingers and the hand, pointing towards a keyhole while showing love. So for me, this was water answering whether or not I was ready to ask her questions. An actual relationship. And obviously, we're back to where we started with this other method of dripping. She was already talking to me. And by the way, this is not a me thing. This is an all of us thing. So I also want to say this. Let me find my present button. One second. If we keep going with all of this, there is no limit to the amount of coherence or information or crystallization that water can hold. So what happens is that the water molecule, the molecules of water, like in a body of water, the water molecules can organize themselves coherently to form ever increasing fractal patterns of order. You put more water in and it finds another way to organize itself, and it finds another way to organize itself. Fractally, it all starts organizing itself together. And there is no limit, there's no scientific limit to how much water can cohere with when you add more water. It can continue to fractally grow in order. This is how it holds the information. Water is from outside of time and it flows into time. It's a quantum substance. Past, present, future, relationship. It's an interface of consciousness itself. Therefore, water can be made or seeded from higher planes of consciousness into lower planes of consciousness. Just like separating the waters from above and the waters from below, huh? I'm not interested only in the states of water. I'm interested in the dimensions of water. As we said earlier, we established that water is a medium of consciousness that only is H2O in certain visible dimensions. So in 3D, the waters below are all of the waters that we know from the water cycle, right? Like this one right here. They're all of the waters that we as humans are comprised of. 90% of all of our molecules are water molecules. as well as the springs of the deep from Genesis 7:1. Very underrated water below. On 4D, or time, water and its quantum properties that I just showed you, that any of us can learn how to do, that's when it's living water. In 4D, in the realm of time. It can be past, it can be present, it can be future, it can be potential, it can answer questions. When it's in relationship, when it's activated and endowed with intention. And living waters can be activated within the human too. At higher dimensions, 5D and plus, we have the sea of crystal from Revelations 4:6 that's in front of the throne. We have the river of life from Revelations 22. And the river of God that makes the city glad from the Psalms. And outside of all of dimensions, the allness of God, it's the waters from above, from Genesis, from which everything is created as you create subsets of allness. And by the way, subsets of allness are dimensions. So if we begin to understand the dimensions of water, its quantum properties, and how it has historically been used, we can then begin to understand how you can set the consciousness of a civilization or a planet by how you partner, harness, interact, or build with water. Okay, let's start to bring this home. So these are the post-Edenic governance models of water. We have the waters from below, right? All the stuff that we see, the weather, the coast, rivers, springs, topology. We have the living water, which is when it's in its quantum properties. It can be an oracle, as we talked about Delphi, or me asking questions, or you asking questions. It can be healing. It takes you to altered states of consciousness. It can be cleansing, right? The living water properties. And then we have the waters from above that we just talked about, right? Like the rivers in heaven. Okay, so post-Edenic, what is very important to understand is that they only were able to create governance by interfacing with the living waters, aka water in its quantum state, by which whether the pharaoh or the Pythia or the architect or the atoll was able to then create control of whether rivers or coasts or weather or wisdom, that then had the consequence of creating control or non-coherent systems, commerce, politics, law. I'm the one that tells the river when to flow up and when to flow down. I'm the one that turns the aqueduct on or the aqueduct off. I'm the one that harmonizes the spring so you stay in this state of consciousness, and therefore I am the political leader. And the ability, the ritualistic ability to use water for the higher states of consciousness, the infrastructure or portal of a higher consciousness, was just available for few, thus creating class division and a modicum of control. All post-Edenic civilizations, this is the water governance model. In contrast, if we use an example, it played with the whole spectrum from the beginning. Obviously, it had the waters below, right? The rivers and the creation of the earth itself. It had the quantum properties of water because the rivers from heaven flowed into it, and in the mist you could see and talk with God. And obviously, it was also playing with the higher dimensions of water in the waters from above because it hosted transdimensional beings, in this case, God. The water also flowed from the waters above that was able to then have both 3D and multi-transdimensional beings in the same environment. So it built its systems from a transdimensional space, and access, right? And access was built in by participation, like by choice. Adam and Eve had a way to get out of that space if they so chose to. Nevertheless, it was an earthly environment, an earthly water governance model that played with all of the dimensions of water at the same time. All right. So remember this guy? I added one here, right? The meteorite that wiped out all the dinosaurs. Why am I doing this? Because look, throughout history, there's been two types of macro consciousness resets, macro consciousness water resets. When the comet or the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs, it flooded the earth. It cleaned out whatever consciousness was set in place, and it cleaned it out by a cataclysmic water event. The fall from Eden itself is a cataclysmic water event where a dimension got shut out from the human. The flood of Noah, another cataclysmic water event that cleaned out the consciousness of the age from the Watchers and the Nephilim. But now, all of our macro consciousness water resets, they are now peaceful. So the one that we're embarking upon now, that's the Aquarian opportunity, it's a peaceful macro consciousness, macro water reset. Why? Because of Jesus. Because of the water that came out of his side when in the cross. The water that came out of his side while in the cross is Christ consciousness. A new reset of consciousness via water. But this one's peaceful because everything is in him and for him, made by the peace of the cross. So in 1 John 5, this is this crazy verse, y'all. This is he who came by water and blood. Jesus came by water. For there are three that bear witness in heaven, the Father, the Word, and Holy Spirit. And there are three that bear witness on earth, the Spirit, or consciousness, the water, and the blood. And the three agree as one. So there's way more mystery here that I want to unpack in subsequent sessions, but it's combining everything that we've been saying. The Spirit, the blood, and the water. New governance models of water through Christ are peaceful. So this is the future of water governance models that we now have access to. Using the whole dimensionality of water, right? Below, weather, coast, rivers, springs, topology, springs of the deep, through the water that comes through Christ, through the Christ consciousness that got emanated upon the world at the cross, and an understanding of the waters from above, not just the allness, but the sea of crystal, the river of life, the river of God that makes glad. And we're going to do all of this by interfacing from the waters of above to create transdimensional water cycles that will lead to new governance model. where second Adam is the temple, not a temple grade infrastructure. We're bearing witness in heaven and on earth through water. So all of this is just the framework, y'all, the intro to what I want to talk about in the next sessions. Setting a history of how civilizations and the planet itself is shaped by water governance, but then pointing out that most of the power comes from harnessing and controlling the living water, the quantum properties of the water that then created the political systems. But through now Christ, we can actually do the whole dimensionality and recreate and create new water cycles and water systems that grab the whole dimensionality, including consciousness structures in the heavens, Eden being one subset even before Christ. Okay. So on the next couple of sessions, I'm going to talk about all of the different things that can cohere the water. Remember, like when I showed you that molecule that holds all of this quantum information as it coheres and as all of the molecules organize itself. So how does that coherence happen? I'm going to talk about it in the next session. We're going to talk way more about the river of life. Excuse me. And the water emanating from the throne room, as well as the water inside of the human and how to cohere it and how to turn it into living water. Because the waters above and the waters below, it's a macrocosm of the waters within and the waters without. So the human as the temple grid, if the waters within and the waters without are organized, to that same degree, we're able to play with the waters above and the waters below. On the next session, I'm also going to show you guys how to do the crystallography, how to do the dripping, right? Like how we started the thing when water told me the message of she will show me, and some other methods of conversations with water. Yeah, bear with me. I would ask you if you want to see this version, this session again. I'm going to post it on YouTube. And then the rest of the sessions won't be free. You can just go to my website and buy them if this resonates with you. So I am going to stop the recording.